Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, an inspired conversation space between Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner on the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness.
We keep our conversations honest, our experiences real, and our philosophies exploratory. We believe that in order to raise incredible humans, we first have to raise ourselves. We know that in order to rock the family, you've got to nourish the mother. If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively, head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper. And for all live streamed pre-release podcasts and all our free content, head over to our free Facebook group, Nourishing the Mother with Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is Resenting the People We Love puts us in a cage. So how do we break free?
So this one picks up a little bit on, many past conversations in the podcast that we have had, but that it is such a function of human behavior to swing from, infatuating with one person and really resenting another. And the resentment can often really exist in a lot of family stories, particularly mother wounds or father wounds, right? And so when we seek to parent intentionally, we run head first into some of those deepest resentments. And we can find all the clever ways to think that we're getting past them or kind of healing our stuff or not continuing the family pattern until we feel like, oh gosh, I'm now stuck in this cage of my own creation in an attempt to free myself, but I'm actually more caged.
So interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
I often think that about any of our perceptions, that it really ultimately doesn't matter what one we pick, but the second we swing so far into polarization, we're going to meet an equilibrating pain.
Yeah. To bring us back into center.
Yeah.
Because every level, of being is working to find homeostasis. Our psychology is, our body is, the economy is, the environment is, everything.
And us ourselves, right? So we will cut out our mother for the pain that we have around her, but we don't eliminate pain from our lives. It will just, that pain, that dynamic, that whatever that she represents to us will just appear in our children, in our husband, in our best friend, in our sister, in our work colleague, in our finances.
Yeah.
Like it will appear in your value system because you grow through what you go through and you can't escape yourself.
Oh, God. Amen.
Right?
But also fuck.
I know, right?
Like, damn it, that's true. I know,
but also part of me, I get the like, fuck.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it feels empowering to me because I'm like, it just means that wherever my top values are, if I can choose to focus where I'm naturally inspired to move through challenge, that when they move there, I can be, that's beautiful. And conversely, that if I go my top value, because I have a gaping mother wound, right? So I have lived every single one of those experiences, cut out, get rid of, you name it, go hard on it, have all of the conscious conversations, emails, text messages, sitting in counseling to get, I have done the full loop on all of those avenues. And so many of this I think will come up, so much of this will come up in the conversation that we have. But what I want to say is, the person who's the antagonist, sometimes you want to be the most grateful for them because that meeting of myself and my own disowned parts will come up somewhere, guaranteed, because I've got to grow. So I can either say, thank you so much, Mum, for doing that for me and with me, because it actually protects the relationships that are most meaningful to me in this lifetime, and that is with my children and with my husband.
But this, what we're entering, the realm you and I are entering.
I know, we've taken the conversation totally somewhere else.
No, but I just want to preface this with the realm you and I are entering is common conversation between you and I.
Yes.
And common probably conversation with anybody who is a regular listener to our podcast or in our spaces. You know, it is that radical responsibility that says, on some level, I am participating in this dynamic with you, and I am in some way deriving some benefit from it. Mm-hmm. Not you are a toxic person, I need to create as much distance from you as possible.
Yeah.
Which some therapeutic approaches will reinforce through pathologizing particular personality types, through reaffirming our stories, you know, helping us feel self-righteous about the choices that we're making.
I think that's the most destructive one, is when we seek practitioners who keep us in our story and don't ask us to go further than our story.
Yeah.
Then, as you so beautifully say, we just continue to remyelinate that belief system, that perception, that way of doing things, that brain train track just keeps doing a bigger groove in our brain.
It just forges deeper. So it just means that we get there quicker, we get to that belief with even less consciousness.
We see it more.
We see it more, and we look for everybody else who agrees with us that that is right.
Yeah, so we get more and more polarized.
Which makes our cage feel tighter and tighter, actually.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I just love that idea of we will always actually look for support. And what you want to be grateful for is the people who don't agree with you.
Yeah. Even though it actually viscerally feels difficult to be with and be in.
Yeah, totally. Totally. So this is us having a riff, but actually what we came into this podcast with was we did, this is following on, this conversation is inspired by a listener's email, but the email is very personal and very nuanced and very deep. So instead of specifically tailoring a conversation to this beautiful human who is in Bridgie's reimagining motherhood space, so has direct access to you, direct access to a community that thinks like this, direct access to a way of being able to untangle some of this, we've decided to extrapolate this out into a slightly larger, broader, dynamic conversation. And give you 3 steps if you find yourself here, because we will all resent loved ones at some point in time.
Yes.
I think that's a natural function.
Yeah, and one that we don't always give ourselves permission to feel either.
Yes, because we're supposed to
be loving,
be in relationships of love,
be you know, conscious and all of that. So I think naming the resentment as normal, but also naming the fact that there's a process to take you out of that as your constant reality with a particular person.
Yes, because the more polarized you get, actually, the smaller your world gets. The smaller your lens, the smaller your views, the smaller the way that you see the world, the smaller the spectrum of, let's say, energetic frequency that you're running on, which means less opportunities, less people to entangle with, less connection, less availability, more judgment, more separation, more distance, more pain, more them and us, me and them.
Yeah. More otherizing.
Yes.
You know,
so this is the cage we're talking about. Like anytime you're deeply polarized, you're creating your own cage of suffocation. And that the more you polarize, the more you myelinate that belief system as true and accurate and correct. And you say to me, yes, but you know, there's this many percentage of people can or can't ever do this thing. And there's this evidence that says this person's like that. And they're like this because my therapist said that they are this. So, okay. Yep, you have found the evidence that directly proves you correct, which keeps you on your personal self-hierarchy of, you know, my way of seeing the world and belonging is correct and accurate. And, you know, just in case you think you're going to tell me otherwise, I'm going to give you the evidence because we're in an evidence-based patriarchal culture.
Yeah, yeah.
So if I throw that at you, then this all makes sense. So the more we stay polarized, the smaller and tighter our world will get. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
And at some point we'll rally against that. I mean, you and I have both done that to ourselves.
Yeah.
And, you know, over and over.
And I think, you know, as human beings, we will continue to do this, right? Like you cannot avoid this. Like, we're not saying this from some, oh, well, we don't do that.
Oh, no.
Not at all. We're like, we
100% human.
Can't avoid it.
Around we go again and again and again.
I'm now taking this very staunch position on this thing.
Right.
This is interesting.
Or, fuck, I thought this was the only way to be.
Yeah.
And this was the right way to be. And I'm suffocating now. And I don't know what that means. Hello, identity crisis.
Yeah, I'm struggling under the weight of my self-imposed
identity.
Yeah.
Yes, because who am I without that belief system on parenting and the mother that's supposed to be this way? And who am I without those things?
Yeah, it's like you're like naked.
Yeah.
You're naked and you're like, fuck, I'm freezing. And how do I find safety and security? And it's a terrifying place to be sometimes.
Yes. And if we take in context of the mother wound, which is what began this conversation, is I've often thought the very thing that I judge her for, you know, ultimately becomes the cage, because we only judge another for the degree that we're judging it, that and disowning that within ourselves. And so I hold the opposite self-righteous belief because she's so narcissistic.
Because she gaslights me all the time.
Whatever. I have to be the equilibrating opposite of that all of the time, just to prove that I'm nothing like her.
I'm extremely aware. I listen to you. I don't say.
I'm the opposite of narcissistic.
Yes.
I'm purely altruistic.
I'm so altruistic.
I'm self-sacrificing to a fault. I am the martyr.
Yeah.
You know, I am the people pleaser. I am the yes. I override my boundaries continuously in order of service of my children. You know, I mean, I'm saying this with tongue in cheek, of course, because I've lived every single one of these. Yeah. So I'm tongue in cheek with myself. But I mean, the point of that is that then that cage that I rally against is then, well, shit, if I was to take more of that ownership of narcissism back, if I was to take a little more of me and a little less martyr, then fuck, what if I'm my mother? And if I'm my mother and I've spent years cultivating an intrinsic hate of her, then what do I do with all of that pain?
And on that point, you've also set up your life and other relationships in such a way to put your mother where you put her, and other ones to have a compensating support and connection where you perceive disconnection.
Yeah, totally.
So the way that, like, the landscape of those relationships also relies on your continuing pigeonholing of your mother in this particular role, right?
Yes, 100%, right? I mean, I've said this to you before, is I absolutely have the mother as I want her and need her in every essence, but she's not in one human, and she's not in the form of my biological mother. Yeah. She comes through you. Yeah. And she comes through Bree, and she comes through my husband sometimes and my children sometimes, and, you know, the universe. That just even this morning, I had this hysterectomy obviously on Wednesday, and this morning we're walking out of basketball. This mum whose daughter's on my team, I'm not terribly close with, but she's a teacher at my elder kids' school. She's like, listen, I was thinking just yesterday, I could take your kids home anytime you want. Right? But she didn't even know I was having a hysterectomy next week. She didn't know. This is literally like out of the blue.
Were you thinking, how am I going to get the kids?
Oh, yeah. I'm like, as you know, so you left last night with me having this conversation with you going, I don't exactly know how this is working because I can't drive. And here's this woman right the next morning who's, I've never really had that. I just thought just yesterday I could do this for you anytime. And I said to her, you know what? I'm having a hysterectomy next week. Actually, this is divine intervention. Thank you. So here comes the mother.
That's so good.
Do you know what I mean? Like, so the mother exists.
And the challenge in seeing the form of where the mother exists is directly proportionate to all of the ways where we have either consciously or unconsciously trained ourselves to project that, you know, universal mother into our biological mother and said that she has to be all of this.
Right. Can we just like hover on this point? We're totally going off what we had planned. This might be a couple of podcasts.
We'll get there.
So there is a toxicity innate in the way that we decide the way that the good mother has to be.
Yeah.
And I actually think my mother comes crashing off of that. I hate her to the degree that I herald what she should be.
Yes. And
do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Because you only, you know, in some ways you are, if she was just a human that you were in a relationship with that didn't have all of the loaded narratives around what it means to be the good mother, you wouldn't have anywhere near the amount of emotional polarizations and charges that you have on her. She'd just be her, right? Yeah. And she'd be her with her challenges and her with her, you know, things that you admire as well, right?
Yeah.
But mothers often are not allowed to have the complexities that humans inherently have.
Yes. Hello, patriarchy.
Right? And so, and, you know, Dr. Sophie Brock talks about this in terms of, you know, this good mother, bad mother binary, that we actually only know the good mother by having cast this collection of traits and behaviors into the bad mother. And we measure ourselves and every other mother according to that, which is why so many women and mothers suffer in silence around the rage and resentment that they sometimes feel around their children, because they're not allowed to name it.
Totally true.
Because it all fits in the bad mother category.
Totally
and, you know,
true.
you can't be that, because socially you would be cast aside.
I know. Except when you find pockets of women where, just like in my hysterectomy party, you can be like, hey, there's this thing. And they're like, hey, me too. Let me put my hand up with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or in my group where we had a whole thing about like rage and naming it and like, because yes.
It's so true. I just loved how you said mothers are not allowed to have the complexities of humanity.
Yeah.
It's the Madonna.
Yeah. And we very often continually cast ourselves in that role because of the mothers that have come before us, because of how we see motherhood and mothering depicted around us everywhere we look.
Yeah.
Because of the identity that we've attached our self-worth to.
Yeah.
You know, am I worthy if I have a day where I just don't engage with my children because I'm too deep in my own shit?
Yeah.
Or am I just scum of the earth?
Yeah. Yeah. So narcissistic, just like my mother.
Yeah. You know, am I allowed to do that?
Yeah.
For many mothers, probably not. And so what happens is we simmer. We simmer with resentment. Seethe. We feel disconnected. We feel agitated. We blame outside of us in an attempt to claw back the pieces of our own humanity that we have said we can't be.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and I often, because I reflect on this often, I do think, like, I also just want to preface this with, particularly if you have a really big mother wound, which this beautiful listener who wrote to us does, is that I also want to honour the child in you deserves honouring in the suffering. Of course you do. Yeah. Yes, on a human lived experience that was absolutely suffering. It was absolutely big and little T trauma for many of us. You absolutely get to be seen and heard and held in that. But if you stay in the child, you do not grow and the cage gets tighter.
Yeah.
And I only hate my mother when I'm in my child. Because when I'm grown-ass me, as the conscious woman, balanced, also devoted and exhausted mother that I know, I can just love her.
Yeah.
Without the shit.
It's those regressive moments.
Right.
That feel agitated in your body, that feel old.
Yeah.
That feel well worn.
And it's my little child going, why won't you love me? Why won't you? You should love me. You should look at me. You should say these things. You should. Well, that's not consciousness. I mean, it's a consciousness, one could argue. That's my inner child sitting in that pool of that memory and moment going, I didn't get all of these things. Whereas the adult or soul version goes, I was in an equal law of reciprocity. We had soul contracts. This was a beautiful experience for my soul.
And what's required of the human is that work of knowing it's going to feel hard to create new pathways in your body. Because that process of remylineating, when you've got such a long history of a certain way of thinking and a certain way of something feeling in your body, it's going to feel like, I know Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about, you know, this retraining of your brain, like a drug withdrawal. You're having to get yourself to wean off the neurochemistry that you've
Yes.
come to know for decades.
Yes.
And no one fucking wants to.
No.
And so this is why we all have addictions, like, you know,
Yes.
addictions run rampant.
Yes. And second, like next level out from that is you are in a dynamic with this human, both gifting each other that perfect, you know, hit up.
Little hit.
Yeah.
Mm.
You are in a dynamic that literally means when I'm in this thing and I do this dance that we do over and over and over, I get that hit and I get that hit and I get that hit. So we return to the childhood experience that we knew, right? I return to chaos and find it very comfortable, or I will create chaos when I'm feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because it's comfortable on some level.
See, I return to holding and coolness.
Yeah. But isn't that so interesting to know?
Yeah, and we just know. And it's like, oh, yeah, I'm here.
I'm here.
I'm doing this with my husband because I used to do that as a child when I couldn't feel emotionally safe. I'd like,
yes,
I've got me. It's all that matters. I got me.
Yes.
Right.
So when we see it, we're like, this shit is fucked. I'm sick of being disconnected from my partner.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is with this crazy intensity? I can't deal.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck me. I've done it again.
I'm here.
You know?
Yeah.
Or here I am in this dance with my sister or with my mum again that we do so many times and riles me every time. And then I'm like, why do I need this hormone still? Why do I need this drug still? Why?
And also too, like, you know, what's the, as you're leading to, what's the unconscious strategy? Like, what do I go and do?
Yes.
In response to that?
Right. 100% of the time, I return to connection and deep, intense connection with my husband and with my children. Hello, top values.
Amazing. Thank you.
What about you?
Thank you, Mum. Thank you, sister.
Really, this is where I have to keep, but I consciously have to remind myself of those equilibrations and dynamics to love them well.
Yeah.
When I don't and I get polarized and I'm in the I don't get, you're an asshole, I'm in my child.
It's so
I have to grow myself up every day.
Yeah. Yeah, wow.
Just a brief break to the podcast to let you know what's happening in our world. So in bridgetwood.life, you will find Reimagining Motherhood, which is a beautiful membership space where you can come into and really be held and seen in community of other women who are really seeking to expand themselves in motherhood and really be at that intersection of where conscious parenting and the whole woman collide. So it's not either or, it is this beautiful melting pot of the two so that you can really dig deep and expand who you are on this mothering journey. And what about you, Jules?
Is Queen School. So Queen School is now an online course with 4 full modules that you are self-paced and work your way through, combined with 12 months of really stretching that out as I help you really integrate, embody, and move through the blocks so that you can literally become Queen School in your life. So Queen School is all about connection, pleasure, sensuality, magnetic communication, feminine energy, and embodiment with me over now a beautifully integrated 12-month experience. So you can find out more at julietenner.love.
I mean, where do you return to? So when that dynamic plays out, what happens?
Yeah, well, for me, it's like, oh, okay, I've left myself, I've left my body. It's like, oh, okay, deep connection again. So presence with my children, walking towards my husband, owning of my coolness, right? Reconnecting, because my coolness makes him withdraw. And then he gets, and then I feel like, well, fuck you.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, same thing. It's like, it's pushing me back into my top values.
Yes.
It's pushing me to, so the perception of the disconnection is the very thing that drives me toward the thing that's most important.
Yeah.
Right.
It's so good.
So we either unconsciously get that thing hit up or we consciously choose. Because otherwise what can then happen is that, for example, we don't lead ourselves. Our neurochemistry that we've got so patterned leads us. And so then what happens is we overcompensate by, not setting appropriate limits with our children, for example, on our time, right? And we so therefore attempt to overcompensate for the inner child, instead of actually meeting the outer child in front of us. So it's just really powerful to look at, okay, what happens the moment I get hooked back into this dynamic? What do I do next? And what relationships do I feel might be under threat if I was to see this relationship I've got a lot of resentment around in an opposite light?
Yeah, because if I was in deep, loving, supportive connection with my mum, where would, like, there's only 100% of anything, right? So there's only 100% of connection and 100% of support. So I can either choose to get that from one person like my mum, or I can choose to get that from the many, and it's spread across 10% here and 20% there across all of these people that will be in my value system.
Yeah.
So let's just say right now I get it from the many rather than from the one. If I were to go, if she were to live the opposite of what I say I want, so instead of being disconnected and I'm not receiving connection and love and flow and support from her, and all of a sudden I were to, like, we were to have the relationship that I like crave, that I fantasize about and herald, if I were to have that, what would change? Where would the connection disappear from? Because it's only 100% of everything. So if all of a sudden it flows over to her, where's it flowing out of?
Yeah.
What am I going to lose? What am I going to have to give up? How will my life change? How will it be impacted? Well, you've got to look at that.
Yeah, because in families there's a conservation of war and peace all of the time.
Yeah.
So we have a fantasy of this peaceful family. If you have a peaceful immediate family, you're at war with somebody outside of the family.
Totally.
So this is what you're talking about.
Totally.
You are super close with your husband and your children when you're at war with your mother. Or your sister.
100%.
So that is a functional.
Totally functional. We have a really irritating family in a lot of ways. Like his parents, his sister, my mum, my sister kind of annoy us.
Yes.
And then here we are sitting in this little insular circle having our own little private in-jokes about all of their nuances that are quite irritating.
Yeah.
But gee whiz.
You guys are super connected.
Right.
Top value.
Right.
So there's value in the perceptions that you're continually having outside of you.
Right.
And outside of the family.
So it's so wonderful to think about, because kiss the ground grateful for the fact that I would rather have that level of conflict and disrupt with my sister and with my mum than I would with my children and my husband. So I actually really love that they in this lifetime have said, I'll take on that role so that you can sink into this. That is love.
It's powerful.
Like, that is the perfect mother. Not this fantasy version that I see. I sat with my fantasy version this morning at a kid's birthday party with my daughter.
Did you?
I just love it when I sit with my fantasy mum.
Oh, that's so great.
It's so good.
So tell us about what qualities did she demonstrate that you were like starry-eyed about?
Oh, okay. So first off, I get in there. So it's a kid's birthday party and I'm taking my daughter to the birthday party. So I just naturally assume that all parents take their children to the kid's birthday party. No, here was the grandma taking the children to the birthday party.
Okay.
So first off, I'm a little disrupted because I'm like, what? The grandma's here? Where the fuck are the parents? Like, watch my judgment happen instantly, right?
Yeah. So that was the grandma was hosting it?
No, she'd just taken her kids, her grandchildren, to this birthday party. So I sit down next to her and on her lap is curled up, you know, the cutest little, maybe turning 3 to 2 to 3, like cute. Just like nestled into her, you know, chest, heartbeat, bosom, just like so. And she's like gently stroking her hair, you know, like just Madonna, eat your heart out. Right. Yeah. So, you know, we get talking, just, you know, they sleep over every weekend. I have them every weekend. And, you know, I'm still a primary school. She's a prep teacher. She's for 27 years.
She's a prep teacher.
So she's a prep teacher 4 days a week so that she can have a grandma day on her 1 day off and still have the kids on the weekends. And she has 5 children and she has 9 grandchildren that she equally shares her time with and is just devoted to. And she just thinks they're the most wonderful thing in the whole world. And she just loves it so much. And her daughter like messages her every day and pops around all of the time. And she doesn't come into her house and get in her space. And, you know, they might do things differently, but she just remembers how to love them and leans back and just really preserves relationship because times are different and things are different. And I've got to let go of my stuff in order to be just really present and available and loving and stay, because, you know, they go through. I was like, who are you? I'm obsessed.
Wow.
You know, and then I've pretty much monopolized her for this whole party. I'm like, I was like, can I interview on the podcast?
Oh, really? Did you say that?
I did. I was like, this is mythical being to me.
Sorry, I love it.
The unicorn. And
The unicorn of mothers and grandmothers.
oh my God, like just next level, right?
Like you're gushing.
Oh my God, like fantasy personified. I also, though, at the same time know, of course, she has to have an equilibration.
Where's there? Well,
I have no idea.
Where's her devil?
Well, I don't know. I don't know her.
No.
So, but I mean, the stories she tells are amazing. So she even, with her 5 children, this is why I want to interview her, because she's of our mum's ilk.
Mm-hmm.
But she tells it like almost like Rhea, like has a, you know how there's lots of mums of our mum's age who it's almost like they just stoically wash over everything and there's no detail and everything was fine. Yeah. And you just kind of get on with it. You know how it seems to me that seems to be the carrying narrative. Yes. But she was totally different. So she was able to go, you know, the nurses at births were just like hideous and they were so like condescending and eye-rolly and just like, can you just like get on, stop being ridiculous, you know? And so she didn't know, she said back then we didn't have scans or anything. So she was going to give birth to her 4th baby and finds out as she's delivered the first baby, she's having twins and there's a second baby coming.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Wow.
But birthed her 2 twins vaginally in this hospital where even as she's like, she gets to the car. I'm going off totally off tangent here. No, but this is why I wanted to have this conversation with her because the way that she was talking about essentially 70s-esque parenting and birth as a mother who had 5 children very close together without much of a support network. I find those stories fascinating because it's almost like a piece of history that we don't hear. Yeah, the actual lived suffering experience.
Yeah, it's almost kind of unwritten, really.
Yeah. So I was like, so she's this natural birthing woman who's just like done twins and radically talking to me about, you know, how fucked the system is. So of course I'm like in love with her. Yes. You know, like there was almost nothing. Like tick, tick, tick every single one of my perfect mother boxes. Yes. Here she is. You know, angels were singing.
Heavens opened and she landed.
I just sat next to her. Do you mind me asking?
Don't I?
No, of course I don't mind you asking.
Dear.
Like 100% fangirling. Yeah. But also just loving the fucking shit out of her real stories because they weren't tilted one way or the other. They were just like, this was the reality of the harsh life that women lived at this point. And I actually fucking loved that.
Yeah. And also that I guess that just stoicism that they had that just was like, well, this is how it is. This is how we're having to go forward.
Right. So, I mean, one of her twins ended up having cranial surgery at 6 weeks. So I know back then, can you even imagine? And so even then she's in there talking to me about how she became really bonded with the other women who were in this experience because there was no beds, there was no care of mothers at all. We all had nursing babies and children and toddlers who we had no care for. And we're just on the floor of a hospital bed with our child who's had surgery or is dying. Like, I mean, her story is just unbelievable, right? Yeah. Which is why I want to interview her. And she was like, but then I became really good friends with this mum next to me and her child died. And she said, so I'm sitting here, even though I have 3 tiny little ones at home, or I've got 2 at home, one who's with me here and one who is having surgery, like the most major surgery. She said there was almost this stoicism that came in because it was relative. Well, I'm not losing a child, so I can be here. Yeah. Well, it's not that. So I can keep going, you know, just magic.
And how, you know, in some ways you leverage your strength from that.
Yes. Like it just felt like one of those moments of hearing the stories of women, you know, just like the ones that make our spine. I just like eat them up, which is why I wanted to interview her. But anyway, we have like totally derailed this podcast. Yeah. My point is I sat next to my perfect mother and I often find her, my fantasy mother just like floats in. Do you remember when we were at the flower farm and I was gushing over that perfect mother? I find these fantasy mothers just like find me. The difference was this time I didn't get carried away with my fantasy. That time I got carried away with it. And I'm like, and in that same moment, the more I loved her, the more I hated my mother as a reality. Yes. So, and often, right, I have to watch my jealousy because I can very easily hear stories of your mum supporting you. And then instantly I compare my experience with your experience and your mother with my mother. And I decide based on that comparison that she's inadequate.
Yeah, the more times you do that, the more you run the story, the more your mother is in the pit.
Right, but we do this often, right? So we'll see this perfect mother. We'll decide that she exists. Of course she doesn't, but we'll decide that she does because, you know, my best friend has it, or she does it for my sister, or, you know, whatever. And hate our perfect mother in the process of that.
Because she's our perfect mother because of the exact way in which she shows up in the dynamic we need her to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But we think we have these like rose-colored glasses for someone else's experience.
Yes.
Not seeing how their experience is perfect for their dynamic.
Exactly. And they are not without challenge.
Yeah, it's just in a different way.
It's in a different, like I said this to someone the other day, I can't remember who, but the human lived experience of emotional spectrum is the same.
Yeah.
What initiates that hormone or experience to some extent is relatively not important. So when I look at Bridget and decide, well, she has this perfect mother and all of this support and she must have so much more ease and it must be so much easier for her, is she will have and experience exactly the same degree of suffering that I do, but it will likely just be different or in a different form, nuanced and tailored specifically for her growth path. But she's not without it.
Yeah. But we can so easily, when we're in our own challenge or when we're in our own story, assume that someone else has a way easier, which reaffirms how hard our experience is.
It makes me hate my mum more.
Because we as humans only understand things by their opposite. Like we need the perception of something opposite to understand our experience. But that kind of black and white thinking doesn't allow for the nuance and the complexity that is human behavior. You know, when someone calls you something, it's true. Because you're that as well.
Yes.
Like when I was getting stalked on Instagram and I had the most horrible things said about me.
Yeah.
My practice was, okay, where and when do I do that? Where and when am I that? Because the more we can own our villain, the more we can love the villain in someone else, the more we can allow ourselves to be a more fully expressed human, the less the outside world has to rattle us because we're not afraid of being called something because we know that we too do that right in our own way. But we don't have to want to look at that.
It's too uncomfortable.
And the less we want to look at it, the less we want to go there, the more it has to come in the form of our mother, the more it has to come in the form of our other relationships because they're there as a mirror.
Yes. For our growth.
For our growth. Even though it feels like it's not at all.
And also I just want to say, like, it's complex, right?
Yeah.
Your experience as a human versus your experience as soul and the interplace of the intertwining, you know, lived experience of those two is hard. And it's okay that you flip-flop a little.
Yeah.
And one day you're like, fuck, kiss the ground. How could I possibly hate her? She's the best thing in the whole world for me. I'm really grateful. I'm so ready to move forwards as an adult with a relationship that says, you don't have to change. You don't owe me anything. I'm cool to just be here. Loving you as you are for all of the ways that you remind me of all of the things I don't want. So therefore, what's important to me.
Yeah.
Thank you. And for all of the lessons. So my mother wound will always flare. As in she'll piss me off to a greater degree or cause, in my perception, more suffering whenever I need to increase my capacity. So it's almost like she provides the perfect pressure cooker for me to just expand my edges a little bit more so I can hold more, be with more intensity, which I actually need. Yeah. Trying to live a really full life. Yeah. With 4 kids.
And, you know, I think conversely, I mean, you and I touched on this very briefly in a recent podcast when we were talking about our partners and how they, you know, when they react opposite to how we think that they should react. But what if that reaction is exactly what we need to build that capacity?
Yes. Like it's exactly what we need.
Yes. So they're not X, Y, Z.
Yeah, you didn't get what you want.
Yes.
But you got what you needed.
Yeah. And it can be really great for us to ask that question before we go down the story of all the ways that they're not
Totally.
You know, doing
Totally.
the right thing or whatever that story is.
Let's do a part 2.
I think we should do a part 2 because there's lots in this.
There's lots in this, and also we actually haven't hit on our points at all.
No. So join us next week for part 2.
So Bridgie, what do you got going on in the world?
We have got all things in body spaciousness inside Reimagining Motherhood. So that's how you get glimpses, practices, access to that more full-bodied availability of yourself and your family in mothering. And it will throw in a little bit of this kind of conversation that we're talking about here, one-on-one with you as part of group work. And you, Jules?
Is Honey Club and Queen School. You are more than welcome to join that at any point in time, and trust me, with a 12-month journey to slowly help you integrate the changes of opening up your feminine, your energy, and sinking into better, deeper relational loving.
Jeez.
So you can find out more at julietenner.love.
Remember to nourish someone, to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
Thank you so much for listening. We literally couldn't do this without you. Please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively into your life, then head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper.
And if you feel like giving back a little to this free content, please rate us on iTunes or Facebook, all of which helps the podcast reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul.